Hi, Susan. Listen, thank you for doing this. I think everybody watched this. I came in the middle of it, and people are saying it was horrifying. I've talked to foreign policy experts just on the phone, and they said they were really angry and how reckless it was to have this encounter with President Zelensky. Let's start by having you explain what the meeting ostensibly was about, so people can understand sort of, and you can help set the scene.
Yeah, Katie, it really was shocking. I was on CNN Live actually at that moment, and we were talking about the meeting that was supposed to be taking place. Essentially, Zelensky was here to sign an agreement with the United States that was basically demanded by Donald Trump. He was demanding that Ukraine make an agreement to develop some of its valuable mineral resources and give the United States some ownership in Ukraine's national wealth. The terms of that agreement, by the way, were interestingly very unclear. You'll remember that a couple weeks ago, it started out essentially almost as a sort of a blackmail type demand, your money or your life. And Trump demanded initially $500 billion from Ukraine in that deal in exchange, by the way, not for future support, but what he said was only for past support of Ukraine. And although we should be clear that the United States has never, given anything like $500 billion worth of assistance to Ukraine. So they negotiated after an initial hostile exchange of words. And this was presented as good news that Trump was, coming around, that there was a deal that he had made with Zelensky, and Zelensky was flying here to do it. And then hopefully this would help the U.S. move forward on a better footing with Ukraine as it tries to have peace talks.
But first of all, how unusual is it to make this kind of demand for mineral rights? Has this happened before in any kind of foreign policy exchange?
No, I mean, it's a naked quid pro quo, Katie, and it was essentially it's the most kind of transparent version of Donald Trump's view of the world and of foreign policy as almost like a protection racket. And he throws America's weight around in the world and essentially demands that you pay us protection money. That's what this deal was. And now, by the way, after this confrontation that we all witnessed, Zelensky has now left the White House without signing the deal. Trump issued a very alarming social media post, essentially saying, forget it, leave and don't come back unless you're ready to do it on my terms. And so, this is a shocking day for Ukraine, for the United States, for our allies in Europe. And of course, it's a great day for Vladimir Putin.
Well, I think there was already tension. He called Zelensky a dictator. He made President Trump, he made the false statement that Ukraine started the war, which is just patently false and absurd. And so it was sort of tense anyway, right, going into this Oval Office meeting. But describe what happened for people who didn't see it, and they can watch it later, and we posted it on this feed. But describe what happened, because it was really unreal. It was this kind of bullying, yelling. It was really bizarre. I mean, it was kind of so counterintuitive to what diplomacy ostensibly looks like, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it was very uncomfortable to watch in the extreme. I mean, almost upsetting because there were various points in this confrontation as it escalated where you really had Trump and Vance tag teaming Zelensky and, shouting at him and physically, sort of projecting an aura of menace. It was a very disturbing bullying type encounter and you had to wonder as you looked at as the beginning of the confrontation erupts, whether it was something of an ambush on the part of J.D. Vance, who has always been Ukraine skeptical. He was quoted, of course, as a U.S. senator before he became vice president, as saying, I don't care what happens at all to Ukraine. He never was a supporter of the billions of dollars in US military assistance that we did send to Ukraine after Russia's full-scale invasion 3 years ago this week. And so, what happens is they're in there, and then essentially Trump is saying something untrue, and you have Zelensky sort of trying to say, like, okay, but actually, Mr. President, like, why can we trust Vladimir Putin's word? Because he invaded my country in 2014, and, he made an agreement that he violated. And he's referring there to the Minsk agreements. And, he gave his word. Putin gave his word to other American presidents and European leaders and me personally, and he broke his word. And so Zelensky's trying to say this, and JD Vance just jumps in essentially and, begins to escalate matters. And it was really, there will be many people who may blame Zelensky for kind of, if it was a trap, walking into it. Basically, the conventional wisdom is that Donald Trump is such a bully boy that especially if you need anything from him, that you should basically just cave in public, be very deferential. And, to me, it was like a confrontation between a man who has no choice but to live in the world of ground truth because his citizens are being killed and murdered. So he's in the reality based world where the existence of Ukraine is on the line, and Trump and JD Vance are in their kind of alt-right Putin propaganda fantasy world. And so they're saying this crazy stuff, and Zelensky's trying to challenge them, but then anytime he tries to stick up for the facts, they go crazy on him, like, how dare you, be mean to me.
Right. And they also kept saying repeatedly, you haven't been grateful or you haven't thanked us enough for the support we have given you in the past, right? And I think that Zelensky has expressed that numerous times, right, Susan?
Oh, yeah. I mean, somebody just did a search, Katie, and came up with, like, literally like dozens of tweets in which Zelensky was thanking the United States in profuse terms for it. And by the way, why should he be grateful to JD Vance, who's done everything he could as a public figure to destroy Ukraine?
Well, let's take a look at the big picture, kind of, the bird's eye view. And I think I heard you talking about this on CNN, Susan, and Mike McFall talked to me about this last week. Basically, we have seen a complete reversal about face of what has been U.S. foreign policy since World War II, basically, right? I mean, in terms of suddenly cozying up to Putin, siding with Putin, and leaving Ukraine and our European allies kind of high and dry. How astonishing has it been for you, Susan? You've covered foreign policy for decades now. It does this feel like? I mean, what do you think? I don't know what to
Yeah,
say.
you're right, Katie. It's the world turned upside down. What this showed everyone, I think, in very graphic form, is what we've watched unfolding in slower motion over the last couple of weeks, which is an extraordinary reversal of the foundations of American foreign policy. Donald Trump has switched sides in the Ukraine war. Clearly, he is openly advocating for many of Putin's negotiating demands and talking points. And more broadly, he has undermined the security not only of Ukraine, but of our NATO treaty allies in Europe, who are deeply concerned about a militaristic, revisionist Russia and what it means to the future of security on the European continent. And,
Like, who
you
is
know,
next, right, Susan? Who is
well, that's
next?
right. And after you look at that confrontation, Katie, it's hard for me not to think of the people in Poland, in the three Baltic states who are members of NATO, and we are pledged to their defense.
Right.
That is the core of the NATO alliance, is the Article 5 commitment that if they're attacked, we will stand by them. Is there anyone in the world today who believes, after looking at that Donald Trump would honor America's treaty obligations over decades to come to the aid of our allies if Vladimir Putin attacked them? And
Is
unfortunately,
this?
That's where we are right now. And I think in a way the veil has been ripped off. Like, enough with the lies and the Republican enablers and the wishful thinkers in Europe who are like, oh no, Donald Trump, he's just making a deal. No, he's not. He's on the other side. And the
And
question
do you
is,
think,
as we as a country, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to do anything about that?
well, I guess that was going to be my next question, because in essence, it seems like he has given a green light to Vladimir Putin and basically said, we're on your side. We'll support what you do, which is so surreal. And do you think this is going to be the moment where congressional Republicans say, no, Moss, we have a problem with this. You cannot totally upturn U.S. foreign policy in this way?
Well, if they were going to say it, they missed the window, Katie. They have become the Donald Trump party. And I think it's time for people to realize, that the fantasy of, that there's going to be some moment when Donald Trump finally goes too far and that Republican senators get a spine, like, not going to happen. I mean, sure, maybe there'll be isolated, bleats of concern. But, we are 8 years and 5 weeks into the Trump era in politics, not 5 weeks into it. And he has taken over and transformed the Republican Party. And at home, it is attacking many of the foundations of our democracy with Putin like tactics. And internationally, we have embraced Putin, the United States. Remember, this fight today happened just a few days after Monday's vote at the United Nations on the third anniversary of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. And Donald Trump ordered the United States to vote on the side of Russia, Belarus, and North Korea against Ukraine and against all of our Western European allies. Donald Trump has switched America's sides in the world to be on the side of dictators, tyrants, and murderers.
That is so chilling. And I want you, I mean, having lived in Moscow and being, very familiar with Vladimir Putin, what are the ramifications of this about face? If you had to look into the future and sort of predict what this means to global powers and to the world, I mean, what do you think it does mean, and how are we going to see this play out?
Well, it's a great question, Katie. It was a very jarring thing to observe because there is no script for this going forward. There's no playbook. I mean, partially you have to wonder how calculated was it on the part of Vance or Vance and Trump? Is it because they understood that the prospects of a deal were already very remote? You haven't seen Putin, by the way, very eager to raise his hand and participate in a peace process with Trump. And so, maybe they already understood that Donald Trump had made an extreme campaign promise that he couldn't deliver on, right? Donald Trump promised again and again and again in 2024 that he was going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. He said at one point he was going to do it even before he was inaugurated. Obviously, he didn't end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. So a lot of this may be Trumpian bluster that just suggests that they themselves have already concluded that the chances of an actual deal with Russia are very remote, and they're looking to absolve themselves of blame and to start, fixing blame on Ukraine. So that's one of the things that I suspect may be going on here. But of course, it's impossible to see into the future.
And in any event, siding with Vladimir Putin, you can't take away that sentiment and those actions and that rhetoric, right? So even if he's blaming it on Ukraine, he's made crystal clear that he is supporting the Russian side of this argument.
Yeah, I think that's a fair conclusion based on what we've just seen today.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate your taking some time out, Susan. Just when we think we can't be shocked, we're shocked more. And by the way, Donald Trump also promised to reduce the price of eggs, and he hasn't done that either. How does he? Is there any way for either side to start, I know you have to go, but to start negotiating again? I mean, how do you get those two sides together? Is this caused irreparable damage, or, and what do you think that European allies are thinking? He just had Macron in the Oval Office, the Great Britain, the guy yesterday, tell me his name
Fire
again.
Starmer just yesterday.
And
Um,
he was really sucking up to Trump yesterday.
He was, and he did what Zelensky didn't, by the way, which is he went out of his way, and not even not even to defend his own point of view in order to try to make sure that there was no confrontation. There was this moment yesterday with Keir Starmer in the press conference with Trump where they said, "But Mr. Prime Minister, you've called Putin a murderous dictator," and what? Starmer wouldn't even repeat his own criticism of Vladimir Putin and simply said, "Well, my views are very well known, about him, but the president and I have had a good meeting." It just fascinating contrast with Zelensky today.
Well, again, an unprecedented, astonishing moment in the Oval Office. Susan, thank you. Everyone, my followers, hope this was helpful. To be continued. Bye, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
being with me.
Bye.
Bye.